Hello, everyone. Welcome to another program with Albert Abkarian, an advocate with Albert Abkarian. We have with us a great guest, somebody that I just recently met, but I'm very impressed with her background. We want to welcome today Suzette Martinez Valladares. Suzette, welcome and thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yep, great. Suzette, we just had your daughter here, and she left. She's a handful. So let's talk about a little bit about your background, first of all. Tell everyone what they should know about Suzette.
Yeah, so I am a Southern California native. I was actually born here in the 38th Assembly District in Granada Hills. Grew up in Sylmar, and I say, I was raised in Sylmar and grew up in Santa Clarita. I became an adult in Santa Clarita. My first job was at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I was a ride operator in the jet stream. I then went to College of the Canyons, California State University, Northridge, and then worked for Congressman Buck McKeon, which is really when I fell in love with our community. You know, the business owners, the community stakeholders, nonprofit organizations, our elected officials. And while I was working for Buck, I had a niece who was diagnosed as severely developmentally delayed, nonverbal, and on the autism spectrum. And seeing that little girl who had not one word in her vocabulary go, like literally throwing Helen Keller-like fits because she couldn't communicate, to being diagnosed, to having an immersion of early intervention services, to being a little chatterbox that has not stopped to this day. She's 14. It was truly an amazing experience, and she that really catapulted my nonprofit career. So I've actually been
Which is what?
I've been a nonprofit executive for over 10 years. I currently run a small nonprofit preschool, but also served as executive director at Autism Speaks and in advocacy for Los Angeles Universal Preschool.
Wow, that's a full plate. A 3-year-old, a nonprofit, and running for 38th Assembly District. Tell me a little bit about where is 38th Assembly District?
So the 38th Assembly District includes Simi Valley, everything north of Devonshire in the San Fernando Valley, so Porter Ranch, Granada Hills, Chatsworth, and then Santa Clarita, all the way up to Agua Dulce.
Okay. Now, you are a Republican Latina, which is extremely rare. You know, I've been an Armenian Republican going into 30 years, and then, you know, as you can imagine, diversity was not, and you know, since we have a new chairwoman, things have changed, but diversity was not the biggest issue previously. And having a Latina run for a Republican Party in the 38th Assembly District is incredible. Tell me a little bit about how you as a Latina decided, first of all, to be a Republican, and then to run as an Assemblywoman Republican in 38th District.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I was told, Suzette, you're Latina, you're a woman, you're young, you're a Democrat. And that didn't quite sit well with me because my dad never graduated high school, but he was a hard businessman. He was an auto mechanic. My mom worked.
That's what my dad did.
Yeah, I knew how to change a carburetor thanks to my dad. But I was taught to work hard, that you are personally responsible for both your successes and your failures, that you give back to your community, that when you have extra, your responsibility is to give back to your community. And I was also raised a Christian. I'm a Christian, and taught that family values were important to our community and our family. And I actually had a high school teacher take me to go see Al Gore speak at Fairfax High when he was running for president. And everything Al Gore said at that time directly contradicted the values my parents taught me to believe. So I looked into the Republican Party, and when I was 18 years old, I knew that that's the political ideology that made sense for me at that time with my family, and registered as a Republican. I decided to run for state assembly almost a year ago this week. And I decided to run because, as you mentioned, I'm a mom of a 3-year-old little girl. And when you have a child, everybody tells you your life is going to change, your priorities going to change. But when you actually hold that baby in your arms, your priorities change. And the future and their future means more to you than you could have ever imagined. Right. So also, as a big Latino family, it's all about family. You're there for Christmas Eve to help make tamales. You're there, for family barbecues. Family is important, and anybody that moved like more than an hour away was in trouble. Well, about 3 or 4 years ago, my family started moving. My brother moved to Virginia. It was supposed to be temporarily. He's not coming back. My brother-in-law moved to Texas with his wife and his 3 children. they're not coming back because California is not affordable to live in. So my husband and I decided we're going to stay. We're not going to be pushed out of California. It's been my home on my dad's side for 100 years. But if we stay and we fight to make the future better for my daughter and for our community.
That's great. That's great. Let's talk about that. You know, we live in COVID times, and businesses are shutting down. People can't go and cut hair, and never made any sense to me whatsoever. Or you can go and demonstrate or do other things, and can't cut your hair in a barbershop, or do your nails, or anything like that. But we live in this kind of times, and I was positive COVID, as I mentioned to you previous to the show, and I was in a hospital for a week. But life can't stop. Yeah. You still have to move forward. Businesses have to open. Small businesses need a lot of support. So tell me a little bit about what is your vision for helping some of the small businesses in California.
Right. Well, Albert, when I first decided that I was going to run for state assembly, our state had record high surpluses and record low unemployment. And then the pandemic hit, and that has actually flipped. And I think that the priority for opening business, for getting people back to work, for addressing the cost of living, has to be the sole and laser focused platform of the next legislature in 2021. My dad had COVID as well. He had it about a month and a half ago. He actually lives with my brother and his wife and 4 children, and they all got COVID. And yes, I mean, we're here today, we have masks, we're social distancing, we're being responsible.
We have the mask. We both had the mask before we sat down, and we're going to probably put it on after we leave. So we do recommend that everyone wear a mask.
So we understand, we know that it's real. We can operate, we can be safe, and we have to trust that we can trust California citizens should be safe and to get back to work and to get back to business. It absolutely breaks my heart. I mean, there are people that, I'm a small business owner, and there are people that have built their businesses 30, 40 years that are closed and are never going to reopen their doors because we've had an economic shutdown for over 6 months. We have to figure out a way to safely balance getting people back to work, allowing and adapting. And when we're American, we're resilient. We can adapt. We have to, in California, our government has to give the people the power and the opportunity and the authority to do that, because I think they've overplayed their hand and they've taken too much away from us. We got to be laser focused in the state legislature.
You said something that's very important. You said we're Americans, and that American word has become kind of people are taking it the wrong way. They're basically saying, don't use that word. Don't stand next to the flag. Everything has become taboo. When has it become that being an American and loving your flag and standing up for your Pledge of Allegiance has become a bad thing? I never understood that. What's your stance on that? Well,
first of all, as I just mentioned, I'm an American. I will never be ashamed of our flag. I will never be ashamed to 110% support law enforcement. My family came here on my dad's side in 1917 for opportunity, for a better future. And that's exactly what they were given. I mean, 4 generations later, they have a Latina woman, mom, business owner running for state assembly, and it's looking like we're going to take this seat on November 3rd. How amazing is that you can come, your family can come here with nothing in their pocket and build a future for your future generations. I am an American. I'm a product of what the American dream means and is. You work hard and you can be successful. I think that unfortunately, yes, there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of this cancel culture that has to end. It has to stop. I mean, I think that it's unfortunate. I think it's a small percentage of people, but they're loud, and we need to be louder and stand our ground, that we are proud to be an American and proud to support our servicemen and our police officers.
Yep, I agree with you. So where did your parents come from?
My dad's side of the family is from Mexico. As I mentioned, they came here 100 years ago. They moved to the Central Valley, worked in the fields. My dad worked in the fields too every summer. I never had to work in the fields, thankfully. But my mom's family, her mom was born in Mexico and her father was born in Puerto Rico.
Oh, great, great. A mixture of all kinds of cultures.
Yeah, a little bit of spice here, a little spice there.
It's beautiful, it's beautiful. You're married?
Yes.
What does your husband do?
He actually is in security, so he is the head of security for a Fortune 500 company.
Oh, great, great, great. Well, one of these days I'm sure I'll meet him. First of all, I know that you had a pretty tough primary. It was tough, but then when you looked at the numbers, it wasn't that tough for you. You got, with 5 people in the race, you had 40% of, almost 40% of the vote, which is unheard of.
So there were actually, this district overlaps with what was Katie Hill's congressional district, and we know Katie Hill resigned. And I was already running for state assembly against now, I guess it's Mike Garcia's opponent, Christy Smith, but she was originally rerunning for state assembly. And when she dropped out, there was a flood of candidates that they decided that they wanted to run for the assembly seat. So there were 7 people on the ballot.
Wow.
And
why don't we hold on this? I want to come back because I want to hear everything about your primary, because that's when everyone kind of paid attention to your race all over the state. Okay, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll continue our discussion with Suzette. Thank you. Well, welcome back. We're here continuing our conversation with Suzette, running for 38 Assembly District, which is Santa Clarita. All of our Santa Clarita people, you need to vote for her. This is very important. Very, very important that you actually vote for Suzette. Extremely qualified, somebody that you really, really will like, and you'll see her name more and more on TV, on your mailers, and everything else. So when you get that ballot, check off Suzette Valladares. So tell me a little bit about those 7 people running against you. That's where we were. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there were 7 people. I started, before everybody. I think that there were 5 Democrats on the ballot and 2 Republicans. And I worked hard. I knew that I had the advantage, going into the primary on March 3rd. Mind you, this was like 3 weeks before all of COVID and the economic shutdown happened. But I didn't know my win was going to be so prolific. So I actually secured nearly 32% of the vote, and my nearest opponent was nearly 20,000 votes behind me.
Wow.
So needless to say, because of a hard work and a great team that I have, and a lot of your viewers' support and votes, we made it through the primary in a really good position. It's a top 2 Republican position, though, because in California, we have a top 2 primary. So the top 2 vote getters move forward to the general election. Usually it's not 2 Republicans. So this is a Republican on Republican race, but there is a difference in terms of quality and ability for November 3rd.
Yeah. Well, just so you would know, after everything was counted and everything was done, you got 31.8% of the vote, which is 39,000 votes, and your closest opponent. If it goes back to the same kind of a thing, I think you have this race on November 3rd. So we'd love to see you in the assembly and see what you can do in the assembly. Just don't forget us. I always tell people, they come to the show and we have discussions, and then I say, don't forget us. And when they pass me by, they don't even say hi. So at least say hi, Suzette, as we said before. Let's talk about police. For me, men in blue do so much. Are there bad apples in them? Yes. Should they be weeded out? 100%. Very fast and very without any reservation. But vast majority of the police officers and law enforcement officers and military are great people. They put their time, effort, and their lives on line for us. Tell me a little bit about how this whole movement, the cancel movement, has affected you, and how do you see this going forward?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's disappointing and it's sad. I come from a law enforcement family. My father-in-law was actually shot during the North Hollywood shootouts in the 90s. My family, I have law enforcement, my best friends. I actually, when I was at Six Flags Magic Mountain, I was a loss prevention investigator. So a lot of my friends went into service at all levels in California and across the U.S. So law enforcement happened to be my family, my friends. They're actually supporting me. I do have the endorsement of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, as well as ALADS, the Sheriff's Deputies Association. I'm huge on supporting law enforcement, and it saddens me, this sentiment of defunding the police, of not respecting police officers. And actually, what is most upsetting to me about this movement is that they're blaming police officers, but that's not where the issue is actually coming from. The problem is we have a horrible education system. If we want to talk about, the school to prison pipeline, let's address the reality that California is 46th in the nation when it comes to giving our students a quality education, right? All of these other surrounding issues that are unfortunately are being blamed on the police officers and policing, and that's not where the problem starts. And that has to be fixed in Sacramento, which is one of the reasons I'm running for state assembly.
Yeah, again, some of that tails into drug prevention programs that are very lacking, homelessness, that is drug prevention and mental health. All of those, lack of funding in those areas is what is causing all of these issues, both in schools and in our homelessness, which is even a bigger issue in California. Not as much of an issue now. A lot of them have a roof over their head now. But homelessness is something that's very, very important, something that we need to address at some point. What's your position on the homelessness?
Yeah, I've been seeing California's brand has been crisis even before the pandemic. We had crisis, lack of affordable housing, crisis homelessness problem, and then we've added the pandemic, a mismanagement of government, the legislature giving so much power to a governor that, has taken that power and tried to even expand that power. It's horrific, and we need balance in Sacramento. On the homelessness issue, you're right, it's multifaceted. It has to do with lack of affordable housing. It has to do with an opioid and drug addiction problem, and it has to do with mental health. My background working with Autism Speaks, I actually think puts me in a really unique position, as well as my own personal experience. My niece is just gonna be 18 years old in about a month. And she has tried to commit suicide 3 times since she was 14 years old. Wow. There is a growing mental health crisis for our young children, and the anxiety, the depression, the bullying on social media, all of these things have to do with mental health and this growing mental health crisis, and there are not enough resources. I remember my niece, we were looking for a bed for her in one of those times where she was on a 72-hour watch, and we were looking for a residential bed for her, and we couldn't find one.
Isn't that crazy?
It's absolutely, and we think that there's a lack of resources and a lack of beds for adults. When you deal with minors, it's tenfold. So we have to address it, and it needs to be serious policy change.
I agree with you. That's something that we haven't addressed, and that needs to be addressed. Mental health is crucial into what we were doing. And I had Kathleen Barger here, and that was something that she was very concerned about as well. Talking about education, my son sits in front of a computer and he goes to private school, so they have him sit in front of a computer from 8:30 until 3:30 every day. His school is a little bit different than most public schools, which have a half a day, and I'm not sure how you cover a 4-month subject that used to take you 8 hours in 3.5 hours. Right. It's become really a problem. Kids have to go back to school, no questions about it. First, because they need to have the social interactions, and second, because they're just not learning as much. So what have you seen? What do you think is going, and where do you like to see this go?
Right. I think that the school closures have actually been irresponsible of government. My background in early childhood education, especially for our lower, 0 to 8 early learners, they need social emotional development that can only happen amongst other kids. It's social and emotional, right? That, in kindergarten, you're learning how to take direction. You're learning a lot of those soft skills that become so vital when you go into the workforce, 10, 20 years later. So first of all, the smaller children, you can't replace this time. The mind of a 3- and 4-year-old expands so rapidly during those years. This time is not going to be able to be made up, so we're going to have to work extra diligently and hard. And then you're right, just for our teenagers, we're talking about the mental health crisis. The other thing that really concerns me about school closures is that I'm a mandated reporter. So at my preschool, if I notice bruises, I have to ask the child, where did you get this bruise? If I'm noticing that there's some type of abuse or suspected abuse, I'm required to call law enforcement, to call state licensing to report that. That isn't happening. Children aren't in school, they're not at Boys and Girls Club, they're not even at church,
Very
right?
interesting,
There
yeah.
are so many cases of child abuse that are going unreported and undetected. It's scary. That's another key reason we need children back in school. But every level, whether it's high school, universities, there are college students are going to be delaying their degrees because they're staying closer to home, they're doing online. Why pay $20,000 a year for an education that is just online? We're going to have a lot that we're going to have to fix because of these school closures.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Suzette, I always like to have the candidates talk directly to the people who are going to vote for them. That's your camera right there. I'll give you a minute to say what you need to say to the people who are going to vote for you. So go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Suzette Martinez Valladares, and I'm a Republican running for state assembly here in California. And the reason why I decided to run is because California's home for me. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and what happens in her future in California matters to me. And I know that it matters to you, for your children, for your grandchildren. We have to think about the economic recovery of our state, getting businesses back to work, getting hair salons open, getting nail salons open, getting you back to work so that you do not have to rely on a government check. This is a responsibility of Sacramento, who have failed us. We have to address the homelessness crisis. We have to support law enforcement. And we have got to ensure that our children have access to a quality education. Lastly, one of the other reasons I decided to run for state assembly is because my mom passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2018. We have a healthcare system that needs to work for families and for patients and offer affordable choices. If these things make sense for you, then vote for Suzette Valladares on November 3rd, because I want to represent your voice and your family.
All right, perfect. Suzette, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to come to our channel. I'm sure maybe we'll have you here before November 3rd again one more time, when it gets closer and when we know a lot of different things. So thank you for coming in. Everyone, I appreciate you joining us again. We haven't had a program in a while, and I think this was a good start with a great candidate. Vote for Suzette. And watch us again in 2 weeks when we have our next program and our next guest. Thank you, and have a nice day.